Okay, we're back. Hello, welcome. Another Friday with Chris and Dave. Oh, it's not Dave today.
I'm not quite as handsome as him, I guess. So
what was that, Scott?
I'm not quite as handsome as Dave is, but I'll do my best to be a fill-in.
Well, welcome. So everybody, for the regulars, you'll notice that Dave's not with us today, and I've got just thrilled to have Scott Alexander on here today. Scott's a good friend and a brilliant marketing mind. I was thinking about having and we have a great topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you a little before we dive in here. I'll give you a little history of how Scott and I end up on this topic. But I was reading an article. Scott, I was reading an article this week and talked about two different kinds of marketers.
Okay.
And one, I don't remember they characterized them as one is the magicians, the ones that are the smoke and mirror guys that talk about branding and impressions, and then I think the other one was something like the pragmatist.
Mm-hmm.
The one, the marketer that looks at the business strategy for the company, looks at the goals and the outcomes of the companies, and matches, real outcomes to what actually the goals of the company are. And I bring that up because you're definitely one of the pragmatists. I've run across way too many magicians throughout my career.
Yeah, I have a terrible poker face, and so I don't think I could be a magician for longer than like 30 seconds.
I get that. Plus, I don't know. They get wrapped up in a bunch of stuff that to me isn't really has no impact.
Yeah.
And you're just not that. So, and just for everybody, Scott's, he's got a company out in the Midwest called Jairus Marketing. And I got a question for you, Scott, before we jump into the myths today. On LinkedIn, you call it micro marketing. What's the difference between marketing and micro marketing?
It's branding, baby. It's so when we think about micro marketing and we think about like what we do, right? So we do growth marketing stuff for folks in the healthcare, life sciences, medtech space. And it comes down to the fact that if you think of any segment, so let's say we got a EKG, there's a limited number of people that can be your customers. It's like 30,000 people.
Yep.
And so the whole idea of micro marketing is you want to be, you don't need to have everybody in the world to know who you are. In fact, you really have, if you have those 30,000 people familiar with you, you're going to be wildly successful.
Yep.
And so it's all about having really small markets and thinking about that versus like, we're going to paint, a Super Bowl ad. Like we're going to figure out how do we get into the hearts and minds of those 30,000 cardiologists or 50,000 orthopods or whatever the case might be to help influence them on a one-to-one basis.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as usual, you and I are on the same page again.
Yep. Yeah.
And plus, you're taking away some of the thunder of the first myth.
Oh, well, my apologies. My apologies.
That's okay.
I think you got the first myth too. So I'm definitely, I'm doing a bad job as a guest.
No. Well, or you could say you're doing a great job because it's a perfect lead in. Let's do a little bit of things before we dive into the content of today. So first of all, anybody that's on here, if you have questions, comments, if you disagree with something that I or Scott have to say, confront us with it. We like that. I mean, that's probably one of my favorite things to do is get in because Scott and I were talking before we jumped on today, but a lot of what we do, it's not all black and white. There's a lot of gray in what we do. So, one situation different rules may apply. So, so first of all, chime in. Second of all, the topic today is product launch myths or startup myths. The history behind that, Scott and I Scott and I catch up on a regular basis once a month or every once in a while to touch base. And I asked him if he would sit in and join me for the live stream today. And we started brainstorming. We started coming up. I said, well, why don't we come up with myths? And then within 5 minutes, we had 5 or 6 myths. So obviously that's what we're talking about. So the first myth, and it kind of, you led us into it, is this myth of bigger is better. Or the other one I call is, go big or go home. And I don't know about you, but it's kind of ubiquitous in going to market. I mean, we hear it from investors,
Mhm.
investors all the time. We hear it from media, talking about, the one I love is the overnight unicorns.
Yeah.
They present them, but these companies have been around for 10 years, but they're unicorns. So I do a lot of teaching at UNC Chapel Hill, and I hear it from the business school too.
Mhm.
And but it's a myth to me. And you and I were just chatting about this, or we were just talking about on here is
Yeah.
the reason of micro marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really common for people to think like, I want to make a unicorn company, and so I need to serve everybody.
Yep.
And the fact of the matter is that when it comes in our space, when it comes to driving adoption, one of the key things is people need to think that you're part of the tribe, right? And so if you think about, if you come in and you say, hey, we have this widget, it works for everybody.
Yep.
That's less compelling to somebody than, hey, we have this widget, it is made for left-handed fathers of four that are 5'11" and a half, trying to be 6 feet tall. Like, okay, well, you just described me perfectly.
Yeah.
And as a result, I'm more inclined to listen to you. But if you say it's for everybody, then I think, well, it's not really for me, right? And that's
and they also like feeling special, right?
Yeah.
Which is part of that. You're perfect for what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're the perfect personality. You're a special kind of surgeon.
Yep. Yeah. Right.
I also see, when I do it, I think so. Yes, I agree with you. I mean, I oftentimes when I work with clients, I get them to go much nichier than what they're thinking. But I also see that the ones that aren't, and this is pretty common, I see it all the time, it's actually dangerous to go big.
Yeah.
You have mentioned trying to be everything to everybody.
Yep.
First of all, you can't. What ends up happening is you end up diluting everything.
Mm-hmm.
You dilute your marketing messaging.
Yep.
You dilute your value proposition, and the risk is you never hit the mark ever.
Right. Yeah.
So that's one of the other thing I see as a downside. Have you ever heard this term premature scaling?
I can imagine what it is, but educate me.
So, I mean, I've talked about it on here before, but there was a study that came out, it's called the Startup Genome Report, looking at the SaaS world, but they found the most common, most startups fail. They look at startups, but most startups fail. It's like 80, 90%. The numbers, you see all sorts of numbers out there.
Yeah.
But they looked at the most common mistake those companies make is what they call premature scaling. And you can, by that, it kind of is self-defining. But people premature scale in two areas. One is building out products, hence the MVP concept and that type of stuff. But the bigger one and the more costly one is they scale up sales and marketing before they have a scalable business model and sales model.
Yep.
So just the opposite. The intention is to grow sales and grow revenue. Well, they don't do that, but what they end up doing is growing their burn.
Right.
So they can't. Their revenue is not going up because they're not ready to scale because they don't have a scalable process yet. Mm-hmm. But they're driving up their costs and their burn. So it's this premature scaling idea.
We have a just on this front of like going, niching down to get bigger.
Yeah.
So we kind of serve across the life sciences and Medtech space, and we've got a number of clients in like the revenue cycle management space. So how hospitals and providers get paid, and we were actually talking to one of them yesterday, and they're like, we have case studies about these people, and they're wonderful folks. And the number one thing that we were able to do to help drive their business, drive their growth, was to say, we don't serve everybody. We serve a very select type of person, type of practice. And then all of a sudden, just people are like, yes, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I'm interested in knowing the expert in rev cycle for orthopedic surgery, And so that translates to all the people that are on, like, think about who's that small niche of people, because you can always add in additional things. But if you come in, to your point, and say, hey, we do everything for everybody, no one's going to say that this is just for me, right? And that's the thing that
plus you end up doing nothing for anybody.
Right.
When you try to be everything for everybody, you end up doing nothing for nobody because it's so diluted down. But I've seen the exact same thing. So with that particular client, what was the impact and how quick was it?
Yeah. So the impact, I think is 10 or 12x the pipeline size in like 6 months. Yeah. Like it's crazy impressive in terms of the results that they got. Because again, if you think about it, and orthopedics just happened to be a space that they played in, they now have multiple verticals, but they built them out one at a time.
Yep.
When we did the first one, it really came down to changing the language, all the marketing materials. Everything was about like, hey, we understand the ins and outs of, in this case, billing for a total knee replacement. And we know how to catch the errors that are common in the thing. And we know how to, where insurance is going to push back. And they're seen as the experts in that particular field. And then they can add additional services. And the same thing applies to the med device world, right? It's like our widget is used in bariatric procedures, and we're the experts in, let's say we have graspers that are specifically made for patients in the bariatric space. Like, hey, we got the devices that are specifically tailored for bariatric surgery, pediatrics, whatever the case might be. Yep. We're part of the club, right? We are all bariatrics related people, and we're experts in this particular thing of what you need. And that's what drives engagement.
So, and that's interesting. So what you just described is by going small, they have compelling messaging, right?
Yep.
And then that translates into market, gaining customers, which then that's like a spinning wheel too, because all the orthopedics are, they're talking to each other. So now you've got this focus group that you now start getting organic growth inside of it.
Yep.
But then as you layer on top of it, this is the way to become everything to everybody too.
Yeah. Yep. What do you think is the reason why folks go too broad out of the gate?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I think, well, first of all, when we're raising money or we're building companies, a couple of things is when you're developing a new product, there's all this hype that comes into launching the product. And there's all this attention you bring upon the company at that moment in time. So there's this pressure that builds up.
Yep.
Right. That's one of it. They're also on the opposite side. That's actually the most riskiest time for a company that's doing something particularly disruptive. Because if you look at the data, the riskiest time for the development company is that time from launch to scale. So they're bringing all this attention. That's one piece. The other thing is the venture world. There's so much pressure to get the returns that you there's some pressure a lot from investors to hit the ground running. And a pressure to premature scale, as we talked about. And that pressure actually prevents the learning that they have to go through to figure out the things that you were just talking about, what you do with that client. And when you prevent that learning, what actually ends up doing is slowing down your revenue growth instead of speeding it up. Yep. So I think there's there's just this overall broad mindset that we have to be big. It's drilled into us. It's just drilled into us. It's a sales thinking. It's the startup thinking. It's the venture thinking. It's the business school thinking. It's the media hype around all these big, these big flashy companies with these big flashy CEOs. But that's not the way the real world actually works.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, and we had talked about this as one of the myths, is this idea of like following the venture capital path of like, okay, we go out, we raise some money from friends and family, and then we get some angels, and then we get some VCs on. And again, not to disparage anybody who's an investor in companies, but I think it's important to understand that your goals as a CEO, owner of a business, and of an investor of any type are different, right? They're not necessarily good or bad, but they're different. And one of the myths that we were talking about before, it was this idea of like, my investors know what's best for the company, which A, they may not, and B, their incentives are different than yours. The whole venture model, and again, I'm not trying to disparage it. I just want people to be aware of the data, right? Their model is, I'm going to make 10 investments. 7 of them are going to completely flame out. Two of them are going to get my money back, and then one's going to be that unicorn that's going to be all the returns for the fund. And so with that in mind, they have an incentive to just push hard and see if you can scale and that sort of thing, because there's a little bit of luck, right? We're going to hit that 1 out of 10.
Well, they can play luck, but as an individual company, you can't.
Right.
You've got one. You've got one.
You get one shot, right?
You call it. You got one shot on goal. They've got 10. They're hoping to hit on one. So and I think that's critical. Well, two things I think are important to that in the myth side. One is understand the motivations, right? Understand what they're motivated by, and then actually have an open discussion with them, see if there's an alignment of goals or not, right? Number one. Number two, and then just knowing that the advice that you're getting from them is serving their purpose, may not be serving yours. So you got to be a little careful on that. So yeah, I think that builds into this, bigger, better type of thing.
And I think too, you can get some really impressive companies that like look at Airbnb, right? Airbnb started off very, very niche. And then they found this opportunity that just grew and grew and grew and continues to grow. Uber is the same way, right? Like the guys that founded Uber did it because they wanted to show up to them. This is true. They, at least sort of urban legend, I guess, but they wanted to show up in limousines to the clubs.
Yeah.
So they wanted to look cool. And that's why they started a company. And then they realized oh, everybody really wants this, but they figured out who are their core users and what are the value propositions that really drove their users to say, I got to have this. I got to be able to make, to be able to use Uber or whatever, Airbnb, you name it. And I think that translates to our industry as well, right? If you have a device of any type, I think the first thing you got to do, and curious to get your thoughts on this from a sales and marketing growth perspective, is you got to find those people that are rabidly passionate about the problem that you're solving and the way in which you're solving it.
Yeah, and I think there are two pieces to that ravaged passion, right? One is that you've really nailed the problem, the unmet need, right?
Yep.
And to really nail that, sometimes you have to go, most times you have to go small to really hit that. I kind of think of it as, I love my doctor analogy, when the patient shows up coming in with abdominal pain and he pokes around the stomach. He goes, does this? Or not really. Does that? A little bit. And then all of a sudden, he pushes on the appendix or whatever, and the patient jumps off the table.
Yeah.
Well, you're looking at the same thing where you've gone to market. You're looking at. So I think there's one piece is that really hitting that unmet need and going narrow to hit it so your pain goes off the charts. That's what I'm looking for when I'm going to sell a product for the first time, because I can't educate the market. I can't change their belief system. What I can do is tap into to where the real pain is. I think that's a piece of it. The other second piece of it that gets interesting on the sales side, and you see this on the market side, is this idea of innovators and early adopters for disruptive technology. It's true.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
The early majority and beyond is not going to buy a disruptive technology. They're not. It's not their nature. So you've got two things working on you here. One is make sure you're hitting that need that they're going to respond to and quote unquote buy. Right. And then two is make sure you're selling to the right early adopter, innovator type of persona, and not trying, because if you keep trying to sell to that early majority, you'll just, your sales cycles will never end.
Yeah.
Because they won't buy.
Funny. And this is a myth that we kind of talked about a little bit before, is the idea that the place where you find innovators and early the earliest of adopters are at like academic medical centers and things like that. I mean, that is deeply written in like Sharpie in the playbook of launching a medical technology. Is like step number one, I'm going to go to Mayo. I'm going to go to Cleveland Clinic. I'm going to go to University of somewhere, like whatever it is. And like, that's where the people are that are going to be my first customers.
Yes.
And I think if I could dispel one myth, like that is one thing that is written into the souls of everybody that's been in our industry for any period of time that just needs to be changed.
Yeah.
Again, not disparaging anybody, right? Those are great organizations, but I'll give you a story.
Yep.
So we had a client that we worked with that was in the remote EKG space back in May of 2020. So if we all rewind, this is we're wiping down groceries, and this is like COVID is
You're everybody's
Yeah.
scared to death right at this point because it's COVID's going strong and we don't know what's going on.
We don't know what's happening. March
Yeah.
16th was the day that like the US really woke up to like, hey, we got this thing called COVID. May 1st was like we were in the thick of it.
Yes.
And we're working with this company, great company, that was basically trying to penetrate the United States. The Israeli business is trying to come to the US. And, we talked to the CEO over there. They had a gentleman here in the US who was running sales, a really great sales leader. And they wanted to go to Cleveland Clinic and Mayo and that sort of thing, like the traditional marketing approach. Yeah. And we said, hey, like, cool, go with us a little bit. We'll be targeting those folks, but let's sort of democratize the opportunity, because it's not like you can have, your sales guy walking into any of these places anywhere in the country. So there's no reason to limit ourselves because we're not bound by physical restrictions. Let's just cover the space and get in front of as many cardiologists as we can. Yep. And see who ends up buying the product.
Yeah.
And I'll let you guess who it was. The answer is it was not Mayo and Cleveland Clinic and University and fill in the blank. It was private practice cardiologists in West Des Moines, Iowa. And it was all these folks that were not just like second tier in your typical sales plan, but they're like third and fourth tier. But they're buying products on a 15-minute phone call.
Huh. And was it, so I'm going to take a guess here a little bit, but their problems were very different than the academic medical center. Did this product speak to the problem of that type of practitioner, or was it other dynamics going on?
It was, so here's the dynamic. I'm a private practice cardiologist in West Des Moines, Iowa. I'm treating farmers with heart failure. And everything that I'm hearing is if I bring them in, they're going to die.
Yeah.
And so I got to find a solution to take care of Jimmy and Ethel without putting them at risk. And so buying a remote EKG to make sure that my patients are okay is well worth it.
And that the academic medical centers, they had that type of technology to solve that problem already, right?
I think they did. And I think they're also used to having, significant influxes of like really complex disease.
Yeah.
And so they had more resources to say, hey, like I've got a whole crew of people that are thinking about infectious disease and all that here at University of fill in the blank. And so as a cardiologist, my perceived risk level is lower than, Dr. Smith in West Des Moines, Iowa.
Well, it's interesting. So I always talk about, you're trying to get that delta between the problem status quo, the problem of today, the pain of the problem today to the value of the benefit in the future. Mm-hmm. And if, and from what you just described, the pain for the academic medical center, his pain level was a 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the solution was maybe an 8 or 9. Yeah. Whereas with that remote guy, the pain was on this pain scale, a low number being really bad. Mm-hmm. He was a 2 or 3, and now he has a potential 8 or 9.
Huge gap. Yep.
A huge gap. You try to stretch that delta, and that's a very specific persona to be able to stretch that delta. The other thing and I find this interesting, I'd love to get your thoughts on this on the academic medical stuff. Throughout my career, I've actually found that academicians tend to be more risk averse than some of your practicing physicians out in the marketplace, just by the nature of who they are. They're, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that a private practice physician is starting his own business. So there's a certain amount of risk. So it weeds in these kind of risk takers to some level. Whereas an academician, a lot of people that are academicians are going for the comfort of that world, which weeds out risk takers. So I've actually found that as a general persona that the academic medical centers tend to be less. Plus the other thing, all the physicians are driven by ego and by reputation, but people at academic medical centers, by the nature of publishing and being in that environment, they're very driven by the reputation, and they don't want to risk that. They'll protect that at all costs, which
Yeah.
also weeds out a risk taker that might be willing to adopt something that's novel and different.
Yeah. I mean, I think the nature of risk taking is different in an academic than a non-academic center or situation, right? So folks that go into academics in general tend to be more curious, and so tend to go through a lot of iterations of things.
Yes.
Again, it's just kind of the nature of the beast versus people that are risk takers in their own practices, right?
Yeah. So, but it's interesting. These are all bad. So what's
the other thing that I'll mention, sorry, on the adoption curve, because again, we've got a widget. We're trying to get as many people using it as possible. The contracting process in an academic medical center or a large IDN is months or years.
Yes.
Versus potentially minutes when you're dealing with a private practice.
Yeah, your example was perfect. You got a private practice physician when he looks at that product from that EKG product, he's going to make the decision, and it's all happening between his 2 ears.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That same product you take into an academic medical center, it may have to go through a value committee, it may have to go through purchasing. Who knows? The ump number of steps you have to go through to get that product in. Now, I mean, I see the same thing. I was just working with a client not too long ago where we were looking about bringing a product into an inpatient setting, and it was a surgical product. And, we actually, their initial market they went after was freestanding ambulatory surgery centers that were privately owned, not hospital-owned ones, just because of the sales cycle difference between a privately held, run by physicians, surgeons versus going into a hospital purchasing morass.
Yes. Well, I mean, you think about just the idea, I ran a GPO for a couple of years, and I mean, there's constant pressure to not bring in, to make sure that people are following contracts and all that. And so you've got detractors who are trying to do the right thing for the health system that are necessarily not going to be helping you get your innovative product in the health system. So
this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine. It's not a myth, but that's what disruptive products can. You go in with a Me Too product or an incremental product, you're going to have to go down that path. You go in with a truly disruptive product that you and I talking at scale that the pains at 2 like really bad. And the benefit, like, we're going to save patients' lives. I have a company I'm working with that have worked with over the years that is, has a device that helps prevent deaths of newborns. Okay. You want to talk about a pain scale. We give this newborn a little bit too much of a drug and we're going to kill them. The pain scale. So we go in with that product and we start talking with the purchasing around that product. We leapfrog all the value committees because the pain is so high and the potential benefit of the product is so great in relative to the pain.
Yeah. And so it's funny because I'm just thinking back to my days running the GPO. Everybody came in. I was like, my product is a breakthrough. It is unlike anything else before. And I'm like, cool. What is it? And they're like, it's gauze, but it's woven in slightly tighter. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, absolutely not. So I think there's a little bit on the provider side of skepticism when people say that they have breakthrough products, which again goes back to you need to find people that are going to get that this really is different, better, faster, much more impactful than what's available today.
And the best way to get to that, and you talked about, is finding that the pain where you push on their abdomen and they jump off the table, right? That's when the surgeon jumps off the table and the CFO jumps off the table with a product I'm selling. Now I know I've got something worth. Now I know I've got something disruptive that potentially changed. But I see that all the time. And I see it. This is something I run into. Folks at big companies. I've been talking to a good friend of mine about disruptive products, and they're bringing in a new product, and he's a VP of sales in a big, if I said the name, everybody would recognize him, top 10 company. And he goes, Chris, I don't think we've ever done a disruptive product here. by your definition, we're not willing. We don't take those type of risks.
Yeah.
But I also see resumes of VPs of sales from big companies that say they've launched 10 or 15 or marketing guys that have been involved with 100 product launches. I said, oh, come on. So, I mean, that's another one of my myths, and I know we need to wrap up here, but one of the big myths I run into is hiring the guy from the big company as your VP of sales.
Yeah.
It looks good on the resume. It might look good in the pitch deck, but you want to talk about a group that'll premature scale and really struggle with really bringing disruptive products to market. I mean, you live in that type of environment. You're in a big company. You're in the execution stage in sales and marketing 100% of the time. To step back and shift your mindset to the discovery mindset. That, even just the example you talked about is, hey, listen, telling your client to say, hey, listen, let's not go after that business. Let's do a little broader shot. We don't know what we're going to find, but let's take the broader shot to start doing some experiments and see what uncovers through it. That's not in the mindset of a big company.
Right. It's counterintuitive. It's the exact opposite of what they're used to.
It's the exact opposite, right? So
that's when your greatest strength becomes your greatest weakness, right? I'm good at managing this. Now I'm going to go do something completely different where my paradigms and heuristics are the opposite of what they should be.
Exactly. And yes. And so that's another myth is, hire I think that's a particularly dangerous one, is hiring the big company guy to run your sales and marketing. I've seen that throughout my career over and over again. And it's that one's particularly dangerous as well, from my perspective. So, Scott, this has been wonderful. And I think we only covered a couple of our myths. We probably got 5 or 6 more to talk about, but it's been an absolute blast. Any last thoughts you want to leave folks with?
No, I want to encourage everybody. I mean, I think we're in an industry that's fundamentally built around innovation and disruption and doing things better than we did yesterday. And it's really cool being able to see all the really neat things that are coming out. And I just want to encourage everybody to keep the pedal to the floor. Let's go do things that are going to save lives, improve the quality of lives, and don't come in expecting that the playbook is of what works in a big company is what works for a smaller company or a startup or somebody who's really innovating. But there is a way to do it, and go do great things. Go change the world.
So, okay, well, I'm going to leave. I'll leave it at that. The one thing I'm going to do to finish up today is, Scott, thanks. It's been a blast. Love to do it with you again if you want to come back. We can even stay on the same topic and just
that'd be fun.
Eat out some more of them.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'd like that.
So it's been wonderful. Thank you for joining me. Everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll be doing this again in a couple of weeks, and we'll definitely have Scott back for either this topic or another topic. So everybody, thank you for your time today, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Thanks, guys. Yep.